17 years. That's how long the truth waited. 17 quiet, ordinary years before it walked right back into his life and shattered everything he thought he knew. Now, before I start, let me ask you something. Have you ever been blamed for something you didn't do, and no matter how hard you tried to tell the truth, nobody believed you? Yeah, that kind of hurt sits deep, the kind that doesn't just fade with time. This story started on a humid August night in Atlanta, back when flip phones were still a thing and people still argued face-to-face instead of through text messages. Her name was Renee Carter, 32 years old, nursing assistant, the kind of woman who worked double shifts and still found the energy to cook Sunday dinner for her mama. And back then, there was only one man she thought she'd spend her life with: Marcus Hill. Marcus was the kind of man people liked at first glance. Tall, smooth talker, the kind who could make a room laugh with one sentence. But, as some of us learned the hard way, a man's charm can sometimes be louder than his character. Now, Renee loved Marcus for 5 years. 5 long years of cookouts, shared rent, late-night talks about the future, and promises about the family they would build. And then, one Tuesday morning, Renee walked into their apartment bathroom holding a pregnancy test. 2 pink lines, clear as daylight. She sat on the edge of the bathtub, staring at that little plastic stick like it might suddenly change its mind. Then she laughed. Not the loud kind of laugh, but the kind that slips out when life surprises you. "Marcus gonna lose his mind," she whispered to herself. And she meant that in a good way. Or at least, she thought she did. That evening, Marcus came home around 7. He tossed his keys on the counter, kicked off his shoes, and said the same thing he always said. "Babe, you wouldn't believe the day I had." Renee stood in the kitchen doorway holding that pregnancy test behind her back. Her heart was pounding so loud she swore Marcus could hear it. "Marcus," she said softly, "I got something to tell you." Now, let me pause here for a second, because if you've lived long enough, you already know, sometimes the moment you think will change your life for the better is actually the moment everything starts falling apart. Marcus walked toward her. "What's going on?" he asked. Renee slowly lifted her hand and showed him the test. For a second, Marcus just stared. No smile, no excitement, just silence. And then he said something that would follow Renee for the next 17 years. 3 words. 3 cold, sharp words. "That ain't mine." Renee blinked. "Marcus, what?" He stepped back like she just accused him of something. "I said that baby ain't mine." And the way he said it wasn't confusion. It was certainty. The kind of certainty that makes your stomach drop. But what Marcus said next? That was the moment Renee realized the man she loved might not have been the man she thought she knew. And trust me, it only got worse from there. Now, when Marcus said those words, "That ain't mine," Renee actually laughed. Not because it was funny, but because sometimes when something is so ridiculous, your brain refuses to process it right away. She shook her head slowly. "Marcus, stop playing," she said, setting the pregnancy test on the kitchen counter. "You know you the only man I've been with." But Marcus didn't laugh back. In fact, his face got tighter. You ever seen somebody already make up their mind before the conversation even starts? Yeah, that was Marcus. He crossed his arms and leaned against the counter. "Nah," he said flatly. "Don't try that with me." Now Renee's smile faded. "Try what?" Marcus shrugged like he was bored with the whole situation. "You know what I'm talking about." And right there, something shifted in the room. The air got heavier. Renee felt that little twist in her stomach, the one people get when they realize a simple conversation is turning into something else entirely. Marcus, she said slowly, what exactly are you accusing me of? Marcus scoffed. I ain't accusing you of nothing. I'm just saying that baby ain't mine. Now, let me ask you something. Have you ever had someone look you dead in the eye and rewrite reality like you weren't even there? Because that's exactly what was happening. Renee felt heat rise in her chest. Marcus Hill, we've been together 5 years. I know how long we've been together, he snapped, and I know what I'm saying. Then he said something that made Renee's hands start shaking. I saw the way you talked to that dude at the cookout last month. Renee blinked. What dude? That tall dude, blue shirt. Now Renee actually stared at him. You mean Derek, my cousin? Marcus hesitated, just for a second, but instead of backing down, he doubled down. Yeah, well, cousin or not, y'all looked real friendly. Now at this point, Renee was so stunned she almost forgot to breathe. Marcus, she said slowly, you met Derek before, at my mama's house. Marcus waved his hand dismissively. Look, it don't matter. Oh, but it did matter, and deep down, Marcus knew it. But pride is a powerful thing, sometimes stronger than truth. Renee walked closer to him, her voice trembling. Marcus, you really think I cheated on you? Marcus didn't answer right away. Instead, he grabbed his keys from the counter again, and that's when Renee's stomach dropped, because she recognized that look, the one that said the conversation was already over in his mind. Marcus, she said, panic creeping into her voice, where are you going? He walked toward the door. I'm not about to raise somebody else's kid, he said. Simple. Cold, like he was talking about returning the wrong order at a restaurant. Renee followed him into the living room. Marcus, we can get a test. Now, remember, this was years before those quick little drugstore DNA kits people order today. Back then, it wasn't something you just did overnight. But still, it was proof. Marcus stopped at the door, his hand on the handle. For a moment, Renee thought he might turn around, that maybe the man she loved was still in there somewhere. But instead, he said something that cut even deeper than the accusation. If you gotta prove it, that already tells me everything I need to know. Then he opened the door, and just like that, Marcus Hill walked out of Renee Carter's life, leaving behind an apartment, a broken promise, and a baby he refused to claim. But here's the part Marcus didn't understand yet. Walking away from the truth doesn't make it disappear. Sometimes it just gives time to grow stronger. And 17 years later, that truth was coming back, and it wasn't coming quietly. When the door slammed behind Marcus that night, Renee stood in the middle of the living room like the ground had disappeared under her feet. You ever have a moment where life changes so fast your brain can't catch up? That was Renee. 5 years together, 5 years of promises, and just like that, he was gone. At first, she told herself Marcus would cool down. Maybe he was scared. Maybe he just needed a day or two to think. So she called him. Once. No answer. Twice. Straight to voicemail. By the fourth call, her voice started shaking. Marcus, please call me back. We can talk about this. But Marcus never called back that night, or the next day, or the next week. And slowly, reality started settling in. Marcus Hill wasn't coming back. Now, let me ask you something. Have you ever waited for someone to do the right thing, knowing deep down they probably wouldn't? Yeah, that kind of waiting hurts in a quiet way. A few weeks later, Renee had her first doctor's appointment. She sat alone in a small exam room while the nurse prepared the ultrasound machine. "First baby?" the nurse asked kindly. Renee nodded. "Yes, ma'am." But inside, her chest felt tight because the chair beside her was empty and it wasn't supposed to be. The doctor turned the monitor toward her. "All right, Miss Carter, let's take a look." A few seconds later, the room filled with a soft, steady sound. Thump, 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 thump. The baby's heartbeat. Renee covered her mouth as tears filled her eyes, not just from joy, but from the realization that Marcus had chosen not to hear that sound. That moment should have belonged to both of them. Instead, she was sitting there alone. Months passed. Marcus eventually returned to the apartment one afternoon, not to apologize, not to explain himself, just to collect the rest of his things. He walked through the door like a stranger, avoiding eye contact, moving quickly from room to room. Renee stood near the kitchen table, one hand resting on her growing stomach. "Marcus," she said quietly, "you really not gonna talk to me?" Marcus zipped up a duffel bag. "I already said what I had to say." Renee's voice cracked. "Then let's get the test." Now, back then, DNA tests weren't something you ordered online overnight, but it was still proof, still truth. Marcus sighed, like she was asking him to solve a math problem he didn't feel like doing. "I'm not wasting money on something I already know." Renee stared at him. "You don't know anything." Marcus slung the bag over his shoulder. "Yeah," he said coldly, "I do." And with that, he walked out again. But this time, it felt permanent. Now, heartbreak doesn't pause life. Bills still come, rent still needs paying, and babies, they don't wait for emotional closure. 7 months later, Renee gave birth to a baby boy. She named him Isaiah. 7 pounds, bright eyes. And the moment that little baby wrapped his tiny fingers around hers, Renee made a quiet promise. "If your daddy doesn't want you," she whispered softly, "that's his loss." But what Renee didn't know yet was that 17 years later, Marcus Hill was going to look into Isaiah's face and realize the truth had been standing in front of him the entire time. By the time Isaiah Carter turned 16, people around the neighborhood had already started saying the same thing. "That boy going places." You know how sometimes you meet a young person and you can just feel it? The discipline, the focus, the quiet determination. That was Isaiah. Renee saw it years ago, back when he was just a little boy dribbling a basketball that was almost bigger than he was. But by 16, Isaiah wasn't just playing for fun anymore. He was good. Really good. Now, if you've ever spent time around American neighborhoods, you already know something. Basketball courts are more than just courts. They're classrooms. They're therapy. They're where kids learn confidence, and sometimes where they escape the problems waiting at home. Isaiah spent countless hours on the cracked concrete court behind their apartment building. Early mornings before school, late evenings under flickering streetlights. The steady rhythm of the ball bouncing against the pavement became part of the neighborhood soundtrack. Bounce, dribble, shoot, again, and again, and again. Sometimes Renee would watch him from the kitchen window while washing dishes, her son moving across that court with the same stubborn determination she used to survive life. Now, Isaiah's high school coach noticed it too. One afternoon during practice, Coach Daniels blew his whistle and pointed toward Isaiah. "Boy," he said, shaking his head, "where'd you learn to move like that?" Isaiah shrugged. Just been playing a long time, Coach. The team laughed, but Coach Daniels wasn't joking. That kid had talent, natural instinct, the kind scouts start noticing. But one day, during practice, Coach asked a question that stuck with Isaiah longer than he expected. Your dad play ball too? Now Isaiah hesitated, just for a second. Not that I know of. Coach nodded casually and kept the drill going. But the question followed Isaiah home that night. You ever notice how one simple question can sit in the back of your mind all day? Yeah, that was happening now. Later that evening, Isaiah sat at the dinner table, scrolling through his phone. Renee placed a plate of baked chicken and green beans in front of him. You eat before that food gets cold, she said. Isaiah grinned. Yes, ma'am. He took a few bites. Then he looked up. Mom, can I ask you something? Now, parents watching this already know. Whenever your kid starts a sentence like that, you instantly wonder what's coming next. Renee leaned against the counter. What's on your mind? Isaiah rubbed the back of his neck. Well, Coach asked me something today. Oh, yeah? He asked if my dad played basketball. The room grew quiet. Isaiah looked up at her. So, who is my dad? And just like that, a question Renee had managed to avoid for 16 years finally arrived. Because the truth is, kids can grow up without a father, but eventually they start wondering about the man who walked away. And what Isaiah didn't realize yet was that the answer to his question was already closer than either of them imagined. Because in just a few months, Marcus Hill was going to see Isaiah on a basketball court. And when he did, something about that young man's face was going to stop him cold. Life has a strange way of circling back, sometimes slowly, sometimes when you least expect it. And 17 years after Marcus Hill walked out that apartment door, life was about to tap him on the shoulder. Now, Marcus had moved on a long time ago, or at least that's what he told himself. He left Atlanta not long after Renee got pregnant and settled 2 hours away in Birmingham. New city, new apartment, new people. And eventually, a new relationship. Marcus married a woman named Tasha about 6 years later. Tasha was practical, organized, the kind of woman who kept calendars on the fridge and paid bills 2 weeks early. They had a comfortable life. Decent house, steady jobs, weekend grocery trips, and the occasional barbecue with neighbors. But one thing never happened. They never had children. At first, they thought it was just bad timing. Then a year passed. Then 2. Doctor visits started replacing guesswork. And one afternoon, sitting inside a quiet medical office, Marcus heard something he never expected. The doctor cleared his throat. Mr. Hill, the tests show you have a very low fertility count. Marcus frowned. What does that mean exactly? The doctor folded his hands. It means the chances of you fathering a child naturally are extremely small. Now, let me pause here for a second, because life has a way of delivering irony so sharp it almost feels intentional. Marcus nodded slowly, like the information didn't matter. But on the drive home, that sentence kept echoing in his head. Extremely small. For the first time in years, Marcus thought about Renee, and the baby she said was his. He pushed the thought away almost immediately. Nah, he muttered to himself while driving. That wasn't mine. Still, the thought lingered. You know how sometimes a memory sits quietly in the corner of your mind, not loud enough to confront, but not quiet enough to ignore either? Years passed again. Marcus turned 45, then 48, then 50. Life stayed predictable. Work, bills, television, sleep. But then, one Saturday afternoon, Marcus decided to attend a community basketball tournament at the local recreation center. Tasha had gone to visit her sister, and Marcus needed something to do. Why not? He shrugged. Now the gym was packed. Teenagers running up and down the court, parents cheering from metal bleachers, the loud echo of sneakers squeaking against polished wood. Marcus leaned against the railing watching one of the games. At first, he wasn't paying much attention, just passing time. But then, one player caught his eye. A tall teenage boy wearing jersey number 11. The kid moved differently. Quick, sharp, confident. Marcus found himself watching him without realizing it. The boy stole the ball near half court, dribbled past two defenders, and slammed the ball through the hoop. The crowd erupted. Marcus nodded slowly. "Kid's got talent," he muttered. But then the boy turned toward the sideline, and for a brief moment, Marcus saw his face clearly. Marcus frowned, because something about that boy looked familiar. Not just a little familiar, the kind of familiar that makes your brain pause. Marcus leaned closer against the railing. The boy wiped sweat from his forehead and smiled while high-fiving his teammates. And suddenly, Marcus felt something strange in his chest. Because the more he looked at that kid, the more it felt like he was staring at a younger version of himself. But Marcus still had no idea who that boy was, and he definitely didn't know that life was about to introduce them, face to face. Marcus couldn't stop watching the kid. You ever notice how sometimes your eyes lock onto something before your brain figures out why? That was happening right now. The boy in jersey number 11 jogged back down the court, calling out plays to his teammates like he owned the floor. Left, watch the screen. Marcus folded his arms. Confident little dude, he muttered. Now the game kept moving, but Marcus barely noticed the score, because every time the kid got the ball, Marcus felt that same strange tug in his chest. It wasn't just the way he played, it was little things. The way the boy tilted his head before taking a shot, the way he wiped his hands on his shorts before free throws, even the way he smiled after making a basket. Marcus had seen those same habits somewhere before. Then it hit him. Those were his habits. Marcus shifted uncomfortably against the railing. "Man, that's weird," he whispered. "Now, let me ask you something. Have you ever seen someone who reminded you so much of yourself that it almost made you uneasy?" Yeah, that feeling was creeping up on Marcus, whether he liked it or not. The game ended with jersey number 11's team winning by 10 points. The crowd clapped as the players gathered near the bench. Marcus turned like he was about to leave, but instead, he stayed. Something told him to wait. Parents started walking down from the bleachers, congratulating their kids. The boy with number 11 grabbed a water bottle and laughed with a teammate. Up close, Marcus could see his face even clearer now. Same cheekbones, same jawline. Marcus blinked. "No way," he muttered under his breath. Now he shook his head, like he was trying to shake away a thought that didn't belong there. "Stop being stupid," he told himself. But the feeling wouldn't leave. Just then, the coach clapped his hands. "All right, good work today, fellas." Players started packing up their bags. Marcus watched as the boy slung a backpack over his shoulder, and right before the kid walked toward the exit, Marcus heard someone call his name. "Isaiah!" Marcus froze, because that name hit him like a quiet thunderclap. Isaiah. For a second, Marcus thought maybe he imagined it, but then he heard it again. "Isaiah, wait up!" Marcus slowly turned his head. A woman was walking toward the boy from the other side of the gym. She looked older than the teenage players' mothers usually did, but her face? Marcus felt his stomach twist, because he recognized her immediately, even after 17 years, even after all that time. Renee Carter. She hadn't seen Marcus yet. She was smiling as she walked toward the boy. Proud, tired, but proud. "Good game, baby," she said, hugging him. Isaiah laughed. "You saw that dunk?" "Everybody saw that dunk," Renee said. Now Marcus stood completely still because the pieces in his mind were starting to move. Isaiah, 17 years old, basketball talent, and a face that looked disturbingly familiar. Marcus felt a slow chill creep down his spine. "No," he whispered, but his eyes stayed locked on the two of them. Renee grabbed Isaiah's bag. "You hungry?" she asked. "Always," Isaiah joked. They started walking toward the exit, and just as they passed the railing, Renee finally looked up. Her eyes met Marcus's. For a moment, time stopped. 17 years of silence sitting between them. Marcus saw the recognition hit her face instantly. Renee froze mid-step. Isaiah noticed her reaction. "Mom?" Renee didn't answer right away, because standing right in front of her was the man who walked away from her pregnancy, the man who said her baby wasn't his. And now, that baby was standing right beside her, and Marcus Hill was staring directly at him. For a few seconds, nobody moved. Not Marcus, not Renee, not even Isaiah. It was one of those moments where the air feels thick, like the world itself is holding its breath. Marcus stared at Renee. Renee stared at Marcus, and standing between them was a 17-year-old boy who had absolutely no idea why his mother suddenly looked like she'd seen a ghost. "Mom?" Isaiah asked again. Renee blinked quickly, snapping herself out of the shock. "Yeah, baby, I'm okay." But Marcus could see it in her face, that mix of anger, disbelief, and something else, something heavier. 17 years of silence doesn't disappear just because two people happen to cross paths in a gym. Marcus cleared his throat awkwardly. "Renee?" The sound of his voice made Isaiah glance at him, and that was the first moment Marcus and Isaiah really looked at each other, face to face, up close. Marcus felt his chest tighten, because now there was no distance, no bleachers, no crowd between them. And the resemblance, it was impossible to ignore. The same eyes, the same brow line, even the way Isaiah stood with one shoulder slightly higher than the other. Marcus had stood like that his whole life. Isaiah frowned slightly. "Do I know you?" he asked. Now that question landed harder than Marcus expected. Renee stepped forward quickly. "Isaiah," she said gently, "why don't you wait by the door for a second?" Isaiah looked confused. "Why?" "Just give me a minute, okay?" Teenagers have a radar for awkward situations. Isaiah clearly sensed something strange was happening, but he nodded slowly. "All right." He walked a few steps toward the exit, glancing back once before stopping near the doors. Now it was just Marcus and Renee. 17 years of history standing 3 feet apart. Marcus rubbed the back of his neck. "Well, I guess life has a sense of humor." Renee didn't laugh. Her voice was calm, but cold. "You got a lot of nerve speaking to me." Marcus winced slightly. "Look, I didn't expect to see you here." Renee folded her arms. "Funny, I spent years expecting you to show up." That one stung. Marcus shifted his weight. "I heard someone call his name." Renee said nothing. Marcus swallowed. "Isaiah?" Still silence. Now Marcus glanced toward the boy waiting by the door, then back at Renee. "How old is he?" Renee's eyes hardened. "You really gonna ask me that like you don't know?" Marcus hesitated. "Renee, just answer the question." She leaned slightly closer. 17. The number hit Marcus like a punch to the stomach. 17. Exactly the amount of time since he walked away. Marcus looked toward Isaiah again. The pieces in his mind were lining up whether he liked it or not. "Renee," he said quietly, but she cut him off immediately. No. Just one word. Sharp. Final. You don't get to do this now. Marcus frowned. Do what? Act curious. Her voice wasn't loud, but it carried weight. You made your decision 17 years ago. Marcus ran a hand over his face. Look, But before he could finish, Isaiah walked back toward them. Mom, everything okay? Now the moment had arrived. The moment Renee had imagined 1,000 different ways over the years. And now it was happening in a noisy gym next to a vending machine. Isaiah looked between them. Who is this? Renee took a slow breath. Marcus felt his heart pounding harder than it had in years. Because deep down, he already knew what she was about to say. And when she said it, there would be no pretending anymore. Renee looked at her son. Then she looked at Marcus. And finally, she spoke the truth that had waited 17 years to be heard. This, she said quietly, is your father. The words hung in the air like a bell that had just been struck. This is your father. Isaiah blinked. Once, then twice. You could almost see the gears turning in his head as he looked from Renee to Marcus and back again. My father, he repeated slowly. Marcus suddenly felt like the gym had gotten 10 degrees hotter. He opened his mouth to speak, but nothing came out. Because there's something about facing the consequences of a decision you made years ago. Something about seeing the living, breathing result of it standing right in front of you that can steal the words right out of your throat. Isaiah looked Marcus up and down. Then he turned to Renee. Mom, you said he left. Renee nodded. He did. Now Isaiah looked back at Marcus again, and there was no hatred in his face yet, just confusion. So why is he here now? That question landed directly on Marcus. Renee didn't answer it, because honestly, she wanted to hear Marcus answer it himself. Marcus cleared his throat. I didn't know you'd be here, he said. Isaiah raised an eyebrow. So you just randomly showed up to my basketball game? Marcus hesitated. Well, technically, yeah. Now Isaiah actually laughed a little, not a happy laugh, more like the kind people make when something makes absolutely no sense. Man, that's crazy. Renee watched quietly, because this wasn't her moment anymore. This was between a father and the son he refused to claim. Isaiah crossed his arms. So you're telling me you just saw me playing and suddenly decided to say hello after 17 years? Marcus shifted uncomfortably. It's not that simple. Isaiah tilted his head. It sounds that simple. Now let me pause here for a second, because teenagers have a special ability adults sometimes lose. They ask direct questions. No filters, no politeness to soften the truth, just straight to the point. And Marcus was feeling every bit of that right now. Look, Marcus said slowly, I didn't know you'd be here. Renee's eyes narrowed immediately. You absolutely did. Marcus turned toward her. You told me you were pregnant. Yes, with your child. Marcus rubbed his temples. I didn't think he was mine. Now Isaiah's expression changed. The confusion slowly turned into understanding. Oh, that one little word carried a lot of weight. So you thought my mom cheated? Marcus looked down. I thought maybe. Isaiah nodded slowly. Okay. Then he asked the question Marcus had avoided for nearly 2 decades. So why didn't you just take a test? Marcus froze. Because there was no good answer, not one that didn't make him look exactly like what he was in that moment. A man who let pride make a life-altering decision. I... Marcus started, but the sentence never finished, because Isaiah shook his head gently. You know what? Never mind. Renee felt a strange ache in her chest watching her son, because Isaiah wasn't yelling, he wasn't angry, and somehow that made the moment even heavier. Isaiah picked up his basketball bag. Well, he said calmly, nice meeting you. Marcus looked up quickly. Wait. Isaiah paused. Marcus swallowed hard. Can we talk? Isaiah studied him for a moment. The man who had his eyes, his jawline, his height, the man who had also been completely absent his entire life. Then Isaiah asked something Marcus wasn't ready for. Why? And believe it or not, Marcus Hill didn't have an answer. But the truth, the real truth, was about to surface in a way none of them expected. Because within days, Marcus would learn something that would turn this entire story upside down. And when he finally saw the truth would destroy him.
Isaiah stood there quietly for a moment. Marcus had just asked if they could talk, and the teenager looked at him like someone trying to understand a stranger who suddenly claimed a place in his life. Then Isaiah asked a simple question. Why? Now sometimes the smallest questions carry the heaviest weight. Marcus opened his mouth, but nothing came out at first, because deep down he knew the honest answer wouldn't sound good. Finally, he said quietly, "Because I'd like to get to know you." Isaiah studied him for a few seconds. Then he let out a slow breath. You had 17 years to do that. That sentence landed like a stone. Marcus felt it immediately, because the boy wasn't wrong. Isaiah shifted his basketball bag onto his shoulder. Look, he said calmly, I don't even know you. Marcus nodded. I understand. Isaiah tilted his head slightly. Do you? Now, his voice wasn't loud, but there was something sharp in it, because understanding would have meant showing up when I was 5. Marcus looked down. The gym lights hummed quietly above them. You missed birthdays, Isaiah continued. School plays. Every single basketball game until tonight. And with each sentence, Marcus felt another year of absence pressing down on him. Renee watched from the side, silent, because this wasn't her moment anymore. This was between a young man and the father who chose not to be there. Isaiah rubbed the back of his neck. You know what's crazy, though? Marcus looked up. When I was little, I used to imagine what my dad might be like. Renee blinked slightly, surprised to hear that. Isaiah shrugged. When you're a kid, your mind fills in the blanks. Maybe he's a soldier somewhere. Maybe he's a professional athlete. Maybe he just doesn't know you exist. He paused, then looked Marcus directly in the eyes. But I never imagined the truth would just be a guy who didn't bother. Marcus flinched slightly, not because Isaiah was yelling, but because he was calm, and calm truth can cut deeper than anger. Marcus rubbed his hands together nervously. Look, people make mistakes. Isaiah nodded slowly. Yeah. Then he said something that made Marcus feel the weight of every year. But mistakes usually don't last 17 years. For a moment, nobody spoke. The gym had almost emptied now, just the faint echo of bouncing basketballs somewhere in the distance. Marcus tried again. What if I told you I want to fix that? Isaiah gave a small half-smile. You got a time machine? Marcus sighed. No. Then I don't see how. Isaiah looked over at his mom. You ready to go? Renee nodded softly. Yeah. They began walking toward the exit. Marcus watched them move away, and suddenly something inside his chest tightened,
because for the first time in 17 years, he realized something terrifying. He might have already missed his chance. "Isaiah," Marcus called. The teenager stopped, slowly turned around. Marcus swallowed. "There's something you should know." Isaiah waited. Marcus hesitated before speaking. "The doctors told me something a few years ago." "What?" Isaiah asked. Marcus looked straight at him. "They said I probably can't have kids." The words hung there in the empty gym. Renee's eyes widened slightly. Isaiah frowned. "What does that have to do with me?" Marcus took a breath. "It means, if you're my son, then you might be the only child I'll ever have." And suddenly, the truth Marcus had been running from for 17 years was getting closer than ever. Because soon, a simple DNA test would finally answer the question he refused to face all those years ago. And when that answer came back, Marcus Hill's entire past was about to collapse on top of him. The parking lot outside the gym was quiet. Streetlights buzzed softly overhead while Renee unlocked the car. Isaiah tossed his basketball bag into the back seat, but didn't get in right away. Instead, he stood there staring across the lot. Marcus was still standing near the gym entrance, watching them. You ever feel someone looking at you even when you're not facing them? Yeah, that kind of feeling. Isaiah sighed. That was weird. Renee leaned against the driver's door. You okay? Isaiah shrugged. I guess. But his expression said something different. He glanced back toward Marcus again. You really never told him to take a DNA test? Renee shook her head. I offered. Isaiah frowned. And he just said no? Yes. Now Isaiah shook his head slowly. That's wild. Renee gave a small, tired smile. Your generation would have ordered one online the same day. Isaiah chuckled a little. That's true. Then his expression turned serious again. You think he regrets it? Now that question sat in the air for a moment. Renee thought carefully before answering. I think some people don't understand the weight of their choices until much later. Isaiah nodded slowly. Then he asked something that surprised her. You think I should take the test? Renee blinked. You mean with him? Isaiah shrugged. Why not? Renee studied her son's face. You sure you want to open that door? Isaiah leaned against the car. Well, I already know the truth, right? Renee tilted her head slightly. And what truth is that? Isaiah smiled faintly. That he's probably my dad. Now Renee laughed softly. What makes you so sure? Isaiah pointed back toward the gym. Mom, you see that man's face? Renee raised an eyebrow. Yes. Isaiah grinned. He looks like me after 30 years of bad decisions. That actually made Renee laugh. And sometimes, in the middle of heavy conversations, a little humor is exactly what people need to breathe again. But Isaiah's smile faded quickly. You think he'd actually take the test now? Renee crossed her arms. Oh, I think he would. Because something she saw in Marcus's eyes back in that gym told her one thing clearly. For the first time in 17 years, Marcus Hill wasn't so certain anymore. And uncertainty has a funny way of turning pride into curiosity. 2 days later, Marcus called. Now, when Renee saw his name appear on her phone screen, her first instinct was to ignore it. 17 years of silence doesn't exactly earn someone quick responses. But Isaiah saw the phone. That him? Renee nodded slowly. Isaiah shrugged. Answer it. Renee hesitated. Then she pressed the button. Hello? Marcus's voice came through the speaker. Renee? I've been thinking. Renee leaned back in her chair. I bet you have. Marcus took a slow breath.
I want to do the test. Renee looked across the room at Isaiah. Isaiah gave a small nod. Marcus continued, I need to know the truth. Now Renee's voice was calm when she answered. You had the truth 17 years ago. Silence filled the phone for a moment. Then Marcus said quietly, I know. And within a week, the test would finally happen. But what Marcus didn't realize yet was that the results wouldn't just reveal the truth about Isaiah. They would force him to confront something much worse, something that would make the last 17 years of his life feel like one long regret.
Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments. If this story touched your heart, like, subscribe, and turn on notifications for more stories about resilience, dignity, and quiet justice. Because some lessons don't come with applause. They come with peace.